Hello,
Hi,
I'm Alex.
I'm Val.
We're going to talk about Sopranos.
Yes.
This is From Where to Eternity,
Season 2.
episode 9.
Yeah.
And very interestingly, this is actually the first one that we've had written by Michael Imperioli, who plays Christopher Moltisanti in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Really good.
Yeah, he's a great writer. What a talented guy.
Totally. Yeah. He's a guy who I'd like to sit down with and talk to him about his process, and
Definitely.
especially like that kind of meta level, like
Right, well,
Christopher,
he's just
Christopher as a writer, right? And then
Right.
like he's writing this episode.
And he's just been struggling with his identity. You know, we had that scene in a previous episode, you know, where he basically has to make a decision between returning to the family, and Tony saying between that and whatever the fuck else is calling you out there, which we know is screenwriting and this, you know, development girl and Hollywood. So it's interesting that then he comes back in this episode where Christopher has now been crippled and he's incapacitated basically from that decision of rejoining the mafia family
Right.
and then being shot, and yet he's the one who actually wrote this episode. So
Yeah.
Very
no,
interesting.
It's cool. It's really cool. Yeah. I don't know what you want to do.
well, I feel like in this episode there's a lot focusing on religion.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for me that's really at the center of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of came back time and time again, religion and beliefs.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of the different characters have a different relationship with religion and beliefs and what they think will happen to them after they die.
Right.
So I feel like that really kind of permeated how everybody was interacting with what happened.
Right.
So
Do you want to talk about different characters then, or
we could do that. I mean, and just in general, I mean, even the imagery and the kind of symbols that are showing up, I feel like really represent it. So even like right away in the episode, we have like basically all the female characters in the hospital, like very prominently showing crucifixes. They're wearing crosses, whereas the guys aren't as much. And I think that there's a difference in terms of interaction with faith between the female and the male characters. And Carmela kind of has this arc of her religiosity in this episode where she's kind of trying to embrace it, come closer to God, use it to guide her. And yet at the end, maybe she kind of ends up where she started in a lot of ways.
maybe worse than when
Maybe
she
worse.
started?
Maybe.
Do you know who the guy on the pin that they have on Christopher is?
The guy on the pin that they have on Christopher.
Yeah. He has this like medallion on him the whole episode.
Nope. Who is that? The Pope?
It's a pope. Do you
The
know which
Pope?
pope it is?
I'm going to be guessing based on when this was made that it's John Paul.
The second, yes.
Yeah.
And
guess.
I like the line where they say he got shot too and he's okay or whatever, right? So he actually did get shot
Right.
as the pope.
Right.
That's why they go in those pope bubbles.
The Pope movie.
The Pope Mobile. But I thought that was interesting that remained on Christopher the whole episode, right? It's not even, it's like this like extra level. It's not even this like direct relationship with Jesus. It's like a relationship with the church.
Right.
And we see that with Polly as well,
That's
right?
right.
We see how that has like these, and we've seen it before, like in college, for example, like how a relationship with a church doesn't necessarily mean your relationship with God.
Yes.
But I thought that was interesting, just in terms of Catholicism and symbols.
Definitely. Well, yeah, and the symbolism, I feel like there's a lot. So, like, immediately, Adriana and Gabriella, Silvio's wife, you see them kind of together, both very prominently showing their crucifixes. Then Carmela and Gabriella both showing them. We have Carmela reading the Bible at the beginning of the episode, which kind of morphs into her reading Memoirs of a Geisha throughout the course of the episode.
There's something to that maybe we should go into later.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we can get into that later. Even actually talking about her with a crucifix, there's a scene later on where she comes back to talk to Christopher, and we can see, this is kind of, so we can see that there's a window that's kind of framing a crucifix in the background.
Right, well, I wonder
So
if this was a Catholic hospital.
it seems like it probably was.
Because there's crucifixes everywhere.
Yeah, there's crucifixes everywhere. But so in that scene, it's actually kind of like very prominently displayed. And then Carmela walks in, and then she blocks it so that it's actually out of the composition now. There's no crucifix, and actually she's holding her book at that point, Memoirs of a Geisha. So there's this aspect of her kind of like coping with her relationship with religion, but I think by the end, when she kind of backs off of the vasectomy, it's an interesting thing because, first of all, the idea of the vasectomy in the first place is kind of taking no accountability for one's actions. Even that idea in and of itself is kind of accepting the status quo and philandering and unacceptable Christian behavior, but it's kind of this like snip solution to it that's not really a solution at all. It
doesn't solve the sin. Like, the sin
Exactly.
isn't getting someone pregnant. The
That's
sin
right.
is adultery.
Exactly. Right. So it's a funny relationship that she has with it. And obviously it needs to be a compromised relationship because she lives in Soprano world where morality is very questionable and you have to kind of sacrifice those values in order to survive. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I mean, there's so much, even like in those first scenes again, like all these crucifixes, and then you see the male characters not necessarily having them. AJ actually engaging with a Game Boy. You see Christopher engaging with his morphine.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and there is this, like, when Janice comes in, she's like, you need to be praying. Are you praying? Like, you got to pray. And then that came back again later on. Shoot, I can't see it in my notes. But there's some, like, another time where characters are told that when Carmela's with Christopher, and when that scene you were talking about where she's blocking the crucifix, she's like, you have to pray. Will you pray?
Yeah.
And then she starts
with
to
me.
pray, and he just falls asleep on his morphine.
Well, he does Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and then he presses his morphine multiple times.
She does the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. He doesn't.
Yeah, he presses his morphine.
No, I know.
As opposed to making the points of contact,
Right.
he'll push the morphine button.
Yeah. You said he.
He.
That's all.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a lot of direct talk, too, about relationship with God and religion. So Melfi, in that early scene, engaging with Tony, talking about hell. Do you think he's going to hell? Do you think you're going to hell? And he says, he's not going to hell. I'm not going to hell. It's business, basically.
Right, we're soldiers.
We follow orders. Now, I thought that was fascinating because that doesn't really hold together because he's the one who basically gives the orders.
Yeah.
He's at the top of the power structure.
Yeah.
So that cheap rationalization of, I don't sin, I'm not going to hell. It's
Yeah,
for the
saying
worst people.
he's not as bad as Pol Pot.
Yeah, well, the reality is he's the one who makes the orders and people follow him. So even by his cheap, shitty rationalization, he would be going to hell. And so he really needs to question himself more in order to kind of have a coherent morality.
Yeah, well, and Melfi, it's the first time she kind of like challenges him on that. She's like, well, what about what happens every day you wake up in the morning, right? Like,
how does that connect to Italian immigrants?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And also, I think, how does that connect to your sin, like whatever, like to being one of these guys like that you've listed, like murderers and molesters and Pol Pot.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how is that different than when you wake up every morning and do what you do?
Yeah.
You know? I thought that was really interesting. Just to go back to the praying thing, though, I think it is, like, related also. There's some interesting, like, when people, like, choose to talk to Jesus or whatever, that's interesting. Like, and it's mostly Carmela that we see doing this, right? We don't see Adriana praying. We see her wearing a crucifix, but we don't see her, like, praying. She's crying and she's distraught. We don't see the guys praying. Like, Pussy's like, oh, yeah, good vibes only or whatever. Like, he's, you know, positive vibes only, which is a funny thing to say. It's, like, kind of a hippie way of saying things, like,
positive
positive vibes only.
Or the jazz musicians. They're all jazz musicians.
They're all jazz musicians. But then we have Carmela, who is saying, like, okay, Jesus, like, I'm going to speak openly and honestly with you in full awareness of, like, my family's sins and this and that. And so it's the first time where, like, her relationship to religion might be, like, its most authentic, right? It's no longer this, like, Father Phil garbage. I'm surprised we don't see him in this episode, but I like it because he's the worst. But, you know, like, she's actually saying, like, I know that, like, my family's, like, they're sinners and, like, we're all, you know, not in your great good books.
Yeah.
but I'm acknowledging that and I'm asking for your help. The whole thing about giving Christopher vision is really interesting too, because that's what she like prays for, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, like, there's something to that I can't quite figure out, right? But then she, like, Tony tells her a lie that Christopher had some dream that he saw Jesus and Jesus smiled on him.
Right.
And whatever, which is a lie, but she, like, thinks that she actually did something. She thinks that what she did worked.
Yeah.
And it didn't really.
Right. No.
I mean, maybe it did. Maybe it did. It kept him alive. And, you know, Christopher's vision definitely does shift after this accident.
Yeah. I feel like it's a bit of a bad omen, though. Like, the first action we see him taking now that he's brought back to consciousness is pressing on morphine, lying there, and then basically asking for Polly and Tony talking about this trip to hell or purgatory. So I feel like in terms of foreshadowing, if we had to anticipate where this is going to lead Christopher, after these, like, rather pivotal moments in his life where he has to decide who he is, he's having an identity crisis, and he makes a choice, I feel like it's more of a bad omen than a good one, that he's going to come out of this and use it, as Carmela says, as an opportunity to repent and to recognize his sins. Is probably more likely that it's leading down a darker road.
I would imagine so.
I would imagine so.
But who knows?
But who knows? Maybe everything will be great. Maybe he'll become
He's
Pope.
Like
Maybe he'll make it to Pope.
Born again Christopher. Yeah.
How about Polly? A lot going on with Polly in this episode and his relationship with religion.
I love the scene with the psychic. I think it's like...
It's amazing.
It's really amazing. And I love how wigged out Polly is.
Yeah.
And I love how they do that kind of like shaky camera pointing at nothing, right? Like kind of like... It's like this like kind of floating orb kind of camera thing. And you can even kind of feel like sucked into this, like there's something there, right?
Well,
like
I thought it was really interesting the way they dealt with empty space. I feel like that nothingness, they give it value. And the way that even they compose the frames, there's a lot of focus on empty space, and people are focused on it, and actually the psychic is recognizing what's happening in that empty space.
It's
so
really
I feel like the
well
invisible is impacting Polly and perhaps impacting all characters in this show. So what happens out of sight and what exists still deserves attention and impacts all of the characters. Even in the end, like, Polly's almost upset with it. He throws a chair into the empty space, almost giving it kind of importance and value and existence.
Fucking queers.
Yelling fucking queers. Which is a great thing to call.
Who's he calling a queer anyways?
Dead Mikey Palmise, I guess.
But that's pretty, like...
Well, they give it a lot of value, actually. You almost have to watch the show and feel like the psychic is equally credible to any of the other kind of spiritual professionals in the episode.
The impact on Polly is definitely real.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the impact on Christopher of having this dream / encounter with the afterlife is real to him. I mean, Carmela feeling like she impacted the trajectory of Christopher's life or death is real. So it is kind of like, if you believe in something, that's what makes it real. If you don't believe in something, then I think that is, then you are kind of dealing with this big nothing. Right? And so that can be equally kind of as dangerous, I think, for characters, even if they believe in something, in my opinion, kind of crazy or wacky. But the alternative, believing in nothing, is maybe scarier in some ways too, right? And definitely scarier for characters, I think. Like, to believe in nothing is a pretty... scary place. Even having, even Christopher having this idea, and Polly's idea about purgatory and how you calculate purgatory is really funny. But like, these are things that they can kind of like grasp onto, at least, for good or for bad. But having nothing to grasp onto is also has impacts. And then Tony talks to AJ, right? Like, Tony talks to AJ about how he sees himself in AJ. in these ways too, in how they deal with their emotions and how they like deal with the world. And so that was kind of, I don't know, in terms of like where we get our belief systems from is really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about, or, you know, with Polly also like talking about symbols, he's getting woken up at 3 a.m. and then the wind chimes kind of keep on going. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the wind in this show, but that's now directly relating to death and the afterlife for him. And that's something that we've seen, the wind in particular, relating to death for lots of characters. That's almost like a general symbol, or just something that generally equates with the afterlife that now is being brought to Polly. He's kind of forced to reckon with it, right?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because these characters are often able to avoid and not confront their feelings about these kind of complicated eternal questions. But now he's forced to reckon with it. Yeah. And actually Tony isn't. He basically just shrugs it off.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really interesting. Melfi kind of deals with it more so than some of the other characters. And even though she's not strictly talking about religion, she is talking about her role as, like, is she someone who's judging or is she treating? And I think that's interesting in terms of, like, people's relationship to God as well. Like, seeing God as this judge, which people do, right? Of, like, who's good and who's bad and who goes to heaven and who stays in purgatory for 50 times their crimes or whatever, how long, or who goes to hell, right? Or you see God as this kind of like benevolent person who you can talk to and ask for help and who's like treating, right? Like Carmela's asking Jesus to not judge her sins, but to help her anyways. Yeah. And so Melfi's kind of going through this as well, right? And Tony's pretty upset by this, right? He's like, you choose now to take a stand, like when this is all going on for me. Yeah. And she's obviously like we see her then tearfully, you know, kind of describing this.
Also the fact that she's brought to drinking, there's also this aspect of she's like brought down again by being brought into Tony's orbit. Like there's something unavoidable about the destruction of dealing with Tony Soprano. And that now she's kind of brought into this world of self-destruction.
Yeah, definitely. There is also this aspect though of like faith, even like outside of the religious world. Like Melfi has to have faith that she can treat Tony, or faith in Tony that he can change, right? Carmela has to have like the vasectomy thing is kind of like because she doesn't have faith in him, right? And
very interesting.
And so it is kind of this like treatment, or band-aid for that. And we see we see that come back at the end of the episode. I'm trying to see if I wrote anything down. No, I think I was just watching it because it's hard to. It was such a great scene, but you know, like Tony's like, "What can I do? What can I do?" And she's like, "You just have to prove it to me," right? And that's kind of like one of the huge. I don't know what the right word is, like tests of faith, right? Is like there's nothing that anyone can do to show you or prove to you. You know, the science of it, I guess, or the reality of it. Like all you can trust is that it's going to be proven to you, right? And that's what faith is. It's kind of like blind, you know, blind following of something and just kind of having to trust in it, which is troubling in this world. But, you know, I don't know. Maybe that's what she has to do, right? Like, is there any other way for Carmela to kind of exist in this besides just like believing that Tony could change or believing that Tony is actually good? I don't know. One other thing on the religion thing is like when Polly then does go to his church, right? So he really believes that because he's made these donations over time, that he has some kind of immunity. Yeah. Right. And he uses that word like that should give him immunity from these bad spirits following him around or whatever, that should somehow solve it. And we have the Polly's priest, who I guess he doesn't go to the same church as Tony, I guess, who's also kind of like an equally useless kind of dude, it seems. But he makes this distinction between psychics and the church. And he's like, oh, you should have come to me first, you know, like, it's this inability for people with these different viewpoints to see how there might be overlap in what they believe, or overlap in what they do, right? Like, it's these kind of, like, you have to be black and white on them.
Dogmatic, it's a good word. Which is interesting too, in the context of them being in the hospital. We also saw the Muslim family.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, there's a kind of like a Muslim family that's also sitting in the waiting room, which just kind of like interjects this reality that there are other belief systems, that aren't even really touched on in this episode, but contradict yet still exist. The Christian faith.
And we see that a little bit when Tony talks to Polly, and he's like, "If you were in, like, do you eat steak?"
Yeah.
Right. And then
exactly.
And so it is like, and then he and Pussy are eating steak, huge steaks.
Yeah.
Like enormous steaks.
Yeah.
Later. But like that it's all relative, right? Like it all depends on your belief system and where you are and the belief system of others around you. Just like Tony said that somehow he's different than Pol Pot.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
In some senses he is like Pol Pot, and of course in some senses he's not like Pol Pot. Mm-hmm. And is he better or worse than him? Depends on your perspective, I guess.
Right.
Pol Pot's pretty bad.
Pol Pot's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Tony's not great, though.
No.
He's probably not quite Pol Pot. How about Pussy in this episode? I thought that there was some very interesting examples of establishing him as an outsider from the crew. There was a few things that I really liked. So in the scene where they say Christopher's heart stopped, right? They're telling Tony that Christopher's heart stopped. There's just like little things like Syl, Polly, all the others are looking straight at Tony, and Pussy's kind of on the side looking down and away. So everybody's focus is straight on Tony, and Pussy's kind of looking down. And then similarly during Carmela's monologue, right after that, we have Polly and Silvio really close to us, really close to the camera in the foreground. Pussy's looking away in the background.
Yeah.
Little things like that. Or even like when Pussy goes to meet Skip, he kind of walks by a bridge. Very similar actually to Christopher before he got shot.
Yeah.
So there's just like a lot of little things that are just they're just kind of isolating Pussy from the rest in terms of the way that they're presenting him in the context of this family that I thought were really interesting. Yeah. No,
the whole relationship between him and Tony, and like the advice that Skip gives him, like treat him like you would treat a woman that you're trying to fuck or whatever, like make him love you. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting how Pussy then goes about doing that, right? By like doing this very violent act with Tony, right? With going back to old times, going to this giant steak place together.
Yeah.
We can see that that's something that genuinely like Pussy still is, does love Tony and does see himself as part of this world, but then he also sees himself obviously as very much a part of it. Yeah. And I think that question of like, who's the one who's changed? Is it Pussy or is it Tony?
Yeah.
Is a good question.
It is.
And I don't know what the correct answer is to that, but definitely like Pussy's got a lot more to deal with in terms of his like secrets and stuff like that.
Definitely. I thought it was interesting actually, like right after the shooting, which it goes straight to Polly going to his church, and there's a focus on the church, and the overwhelming focus is brought to the stained glass. That's a pretty short scene. Polly leaves, who obviously has had a different relationship. Yeah, he's, kind of looking at Jesus. Jesus is he's left with Jesus and that kind of like empty space. Mm-hmm. But he leaves, and then immediately we go to the stockyards, which is established through a shot. And then there's also kind of like these glowing neon signs in the front. There's just like those two kind of scenes are connected. And then Polly, compared to Pussy and Tony, clearly are dealing with their faith and their belief in what the afterlife is very differently. And then I found that scene where they're, devouring meat after killing.
There was also like the most cardinal sin in there, right? Too.
It makes you think about what their value system is, because they're happy. They're almost kind of like celebrating. It's almost like, and they're talking about, I popped my cherry, which isn't about sex even. It's about killing somebody.
Yeah.
Like, that is part of their worldview and their code.
Yeah.
And that's something that they kind of celebrate. So it is kind of like this, it's almost
weird.
like going to church for them or something.
Yeah, there's also stained glass in that restaurant. And weirdly, it's like kind of like an Irish type bar. Like it kind of has that vibe, which is where, of course,
which
Chris
also makes
was
you
in
wonder
Purgatory.
if it's almost like a reversed religion, right? It's almost like that hell.
Yeah,
or
well,
something.
exactly.
So it's almost like, I mean, not like Satanism, but it's like anti-Christianity.
Yeah.
Like all of their values are Christianity flipped on its head.
Yeah.
And that when they go to the temple, they're almost going to what hell is.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
That's what they engage in. Yeah.
Also, I guess like the way that Tony deals with like popping his cherry, which is like, I really didn't like that turn of phrase in light of like kill it. Like it really made me uncomfortable, but like
fair enough.
The way that Tony talks about this first person that he killed versus Paulie's interaction with Sonny.
Yeah.
Whatever his name was, Sonny.
Well, it was a Charles Pagano or something.
Yeah, who went by Sonny.
Right.
I don't think Pagano, but anyways. I think you're just being racist.
Oh, man.
Yeah. That like, so he's obviously like, that's something that really impacts him differently than Tony's recollection of like the first time he killed someone.
Right.
Right? Like Paulie's kind of haunted by it versus Tony's kind of like celebrating it. Like it's like a fond memory. Like, oh, it's just like old times.
Yeah.
Like back when I popped my cherry.
Right.
Ugh.
It's pretty wild. Yeah. It's pretty weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was pretty I really enjoyed the interaction between Tony and AJ.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
It was awful, though. I mean, like...
I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, a classic
well,
Sopranos.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that marvelous scene where Tony says that his son is his only fucking heir.
Yeah, and look at him.
Well, so, okay, I thought it was really interesting because there's a few things. It's obviously horrible that he boils up and takes out his anger on AJ for, and it's for dropping the pasta, and that it's largely about consumption, which is clearly hypocritical because clearly that's something that Tony struggles with and can identify is an issue for him.
Right.
Here's what I thought was really fascinating and very intentional. So when he goes to talk to AJ and he brings the pizza, it's very touching. It's a very human moment for Tony. In fact, one of the most human moments I can think of for Tony Soprano in the whole show so far. He actually comes out very humanized, very sensitive, very thoughtful. And
you usually doubt Tony in those moments. You usually have an
this
issue.
is going somewhere.
Okay.
This is going somewhere.
Okay.
And it doesn't lead somewhere great.
Okay.
But I think that the way that he's presented, we can really empathize with him. And I think that, our view of like his emotional quotient or something kind of goes up. Like he's thoughtful and he kind of makes amends, and we see this kind side of Tony. Now, the irony is that he brings this whole pizza to have together. He gets the phone call. He just leaves it with AJ after blowing up on him about consumption. And AJ's just left eating a piece of pizza on his own. So clearly Tony is complicit in being a bad father and a bad role model, and that he comes and just gives him what he was criticizing him for. So it's insane. Now, where this gets really interesting is that when he goes with Pussy to see Matt Bevilacqua, again, we see this kindness.
He also says, you're a good boy.
You're a good kid.
Good kid.
Those two scenes are very close together.
Yeah.
And for me, that was pretty key because he's now using that kindness as a tool of manipulation. So you were saying I often don't trust Tony. I actually did trust Tony when he was engaging with AJ, but I think he's also learned to weaponize that kindness.
You're the best son I could ask for.
Well, yeah, but then he kind of like, he turns that.
Yeah.
So it's like, he's such a monster, really.
Yeah.
That even that thing that we've learned to empathize with him for, he actually is able to manipulate in a situation to get information from somebody before he kills him and then goes to celebrate. It's actually a new level of where Tony is. Yeah. In terms of what kind of a monster he really is. I mean, I don't think we've seen him just like murder somebody in cold blood up to this point.
We have. He strangled what's-his-face.
That's right. But we haven't, right, that's right. So and that happened pretty early. But just, there hasn't been that many.
Well, he doesn't involve himself all that much, right? And that's like,
thinking
thinking back to these good old days of when he used to kill people all the time with pussy or whatever, and they'd go have a steak after. And then also like Chris's dream of like all the guys were wearing like old school suits and stuff like that, right? Like there's something with that, like this like good old days kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is really tainted with I don't know, with everything. I don't know how to really describe it, but like the fact that people could look back fondly on times where they've killed someone is terrifying.
It is.
You know? And for like when, you know, we ask like who, you know, is Tony capable of change or who is Tony really? That's something you kind of can't leave out, right? That like he's someone who thinks back fondly on the good old days of him and Pussy killing someone for the first time.
Yeah.
It's really fucked up.
Yeah, it is. It's really messed up.
Yeah.
Do you have some other thoughts?
Well, I just had something that I was laughing about.
Okay.
When they're at the hospital and like the feds or whoever, the police are there, like questioning the guys about the shooting, right?
Yeah.
They're like, do you know this guy?
Yeah.
Sean Giamonti, and all of them are like, no, we've never heard of him, which is funny because I could never remember that guy's name. So
Sean.
I kind of like believed, like,
isn't it Gizmonti? Is it Giamonti?
I'm not sure.
Case in point.
Yeah, like again, like kind of who
He's
cares?
such a non-entity to them. Yeah.
But yeah, like it almost was like they didn't even know, like, and really like a lot of them probably like never even encountered them except for maybe at that poker game, for example, right?
The executive game,
yeah. So I just thought that was funny. I loved the scene when they talk about like Tony even says like someone's gonna try to bring his ass, or like when they're talking about Matt Bevilacqua, they're like someone's gonna try to score points by like bringing him to us within 5 days or whatever he says, right? And then of course that guy like
for $20
gives over the information to Pussy.
Unbelievable. Also, like, Pussy's excited about that. He has his little like not fist bump, like little,
he's like, yes,
his little like I want a tennis match.
yeah. I got something.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna say this, you might not like it, but you know, like we have to think about the fact that Pussy right now is working with the feds, and now he's just killed someone while he's working with the feds.
That's very relevant.
You know, he's kind of been avoiding these things for the past little bit.
Yeah.
And we know that just because he's working with the feds does not mean that he couldn't be in trouble for that.
Yeah. Of course.
So he's made a choice there. It's a choice about like developing that relationship with Tony.
Yeah.
You know, but I just wanted to point that out for the future.
And they do kind of focus on that in that scene. I mean, Tony shoots first, and you can see Pussy is a little bit held back about shooting.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
I thought it was really interesting, the very beginning of the episode starting with a musical selection. So the way that ties into the last episode ending with no music, which is unusual for this show. But I thought that it was really interesting in terms of the way this show deals with form. So they're constantly playing with form and what you can do in a serialized TV show. So they can really draw out, you know, the form and the arc of the series and of seasons. And so it's really interesting where they had this very abrupt end, and we're kind of like snapshotted in. We're kind of like immediately our focus is brought to how surprising of an event this is. And then they kind of pick up from there.
Yeah.
So it almost like connects the two episodes in a way.
It's almost like, the camera pan, because the last episode ended with looking at Tony being like, how could this have happened?
Yeah.
And it's almost as if we like pan back over to Christopher, and then that episode starts. Like, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it does connect them. And even the way they use music in the beginning, like they
use that song 3 times throughout the episode.
Exactly. It's a very typical TV device to, you know, use a song as during like a montage series segment or something. But the way they do it is they kind of start and stop it. So there's scenes, and then there's action and dialogue and drama, and then it'll kind of come back, which is very unusual and kind of again gets to the way that they play with form now within the context of an episode.
Right.
So during a shorter amount of time, they kind of break down the way that things develop.
I wish I had jotted down when the music was playing in the middle of the episode. What scene is that during?
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah,
email
I should have
us.
written that
Go
down.
back, watch it again, and let us know.
Yeah, this one was hard for me to like focus on actually like writing stuff down. I was like so drawn into the action but that would have been something interesting, I think. And just again, in terms of form or like what's being focused on.
Yeah.
During that
and
time.
what does the use of music bring out?
Yeah.
Because that use of non-diegetic music in the show is rather unusual.
Yeah. Well, we don't have any other music anyways in the episode, but usually
it's not a device that the show uses very often. And it's like heightened drama.
Yeah.
And it is a scene of heightened drama, in the ER.
But we don't know what the middle scene is.
It's okay. We've had lots of points, lots of ideas.
What else do you have? Anything?
Those are my thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, well, an amazing episode. We're getting near the end of season 2.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing season.
This isn't a particularly amazing episode. Like, I just feel like the character development that we have here and like the knowledge of these characters and really more about who they are is really deepened by this episode. Because knowing a character like on a spiritual level is pretty sophisticated.
Yeah. And also, it's not just like introducing this aspect of spirituality and examining in a very kind of like surfacey way what's their relationship with spirituality. It's already built on previous episodes that have done that, and it's actually going even further.
Yeah.
So it's taking
showing change in some ways.
Yeah, it's taking the character aspects that have already been examined and then building up from that foundation, reinforcing the ideas that were already presented, like in College with Carmela.
Yeah.
It's like a deeper layer of their relationship and the hypocrisies and the realities of how they engage with spirituality.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So, I mean, will Tony be faithful to Carmela?
Definitely.
Will Christopher not use morphine anymore?
Yeah, I think he's gonna become Pope.
Will AJ lose a bunch of weight?
Totally. Stop eating pizza. Got some more? Will Christopher's mother start waking up for breakfast and bring him breakfast?
Yeah, see, even that, just like that little scene, right? Like where you find out a tiny bit about Christopher's childhood.
Yeah.
You get this like little insight into her being kind of like a crazy person.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What else? Will Polly weirdly be like this weird Uncle Polly to this woman and her family?
That actually seems rather promising.
Yeah, he was pretty sweet.
Nice guy. Will he stop having nightmares?
3:00.
3:00.
Yeah. Okay, that's it.
Well, so many questions to answer, and
Yeah.
they all seem
Like,
so great.
the answer is no.
Yeah. The answer is no. Thanks for listening, and we'll be
Bye.
back soon.